Yes, that is exciting. Also, I had an event this morning. So if I have a weird eye twitch that looks like I'm winking at you, I'm not being fresh. It's just, my charm. Okay, we are live. Oh my God, so excited. I am Jenna Blum. I am the co-founder of A Mighty Blaze, and you all know who I am here with today. I am here with Cheryl Strayed. The Cheryl Strayed, here she is. Oh my God. With her mic and her headphones. And
I got my mic and my headphones. Hi, Jenna, and hi, everyone who's out there in internet land. I'm so glad to be here with you.
We are so excited to have you here, Cheryl. I don't know if you remember this, but I love to start these interviews striking down the worst thing I could say about myself on camera. And my confession is that at the AWP, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I trapped you alone in an elevator. I was like, oh my God, I'm in an elevator with Cheryl Strayed, and I fangirled at you like this. And I was like, are you Cheryl Strayed? And you said, I am Cheryl Strayed. And I was like, oh my God, you are my favorite ever. Your book changed my life, and your books changed my life. You were so gracious, and the doors opened and you were like, well, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Oh, Jenna.
So nice. Thank you for
that. Is so kind of you. Well, I'm sure if, did you tell me who you were then? Because I know who you are. I've been your fan for many years too. Didn't our first novels come out around the same time?
That is possible. When did Torch come out? Torch is like, I carried Torch like literally around with me for years, like a torch.
That's so sweet. Yours is the Storm Chasers, right?
That's one. My first one is Those Who Save Us, which I have in German behind me for some weird reason. And that was 2004.
Yeah, that's why I thought that because yours came out right around. So my Torch came out in February of 2005. So I remember you from right around then. I read your book way back then. And so I was your fan too, Jenna.
Oh my gosh.
The way back days. I maybe on the elevator, I didn't know who you were. I didn't see your name, your badge,
I have like writer in the headlights thing. I've done this to several people. I do it to Ann Patchett. Every time I see her, I'm like, hi, my name is I did that to George Saunders once on an elevator, where we were in an elevator at a conference and we were going downstairs, and I was like, he looks like a writer. I should introduce myself. And then I froze because I'm like, oh, it's George Saunders. So whenever I meet somebody I really admire so much, his work has meant, a really influential amount to me, I suddenly become mute, which now obviously not a thing. But I mean, since you're my fan now, we can end this interview right now. I got what I came for. You're good.
Well, I'm always flattered to meet people on elevators who are nice to me and tell me sweet things about my book. So thank you.
You're welcome. It must be a work casualty. It's actually a question I wanted to ask you, but I just remembered that I'm so busy making heart eyes at you that I forgot to read your bio. So just in case.
Oh, here we go.
Get ready. Buckle up. Here comes you. Just in case anybody out there does not know who you're dealing with today, I will tell you. Here it comes. Cheryl Strayed. Here she is, looking just like her author photo, which actually like never happens. You have to put your hand under your chin. So you're like,
I know, I gotta do, I don't know. Yeah, I gotta look in that way.
We need beards so we can be like, yes,
Yes.
Okay. Cheryl Strayed is the author of the #1 New York Times bestselling memoir, Wild, the New York Times bestsellers Teeny Beautiful Things and Brave Enough, and the novel Torch. Wild was chosen by Oprah Winfrey as her first selection for Oprah's Book Club 2.0. Obviously, we have to talk about this. Strayed's books have been translated into nearly 40 languages around the world and have been adapted for stage and screen. The Oscar-nominated movie adaptation of Wild stars Reese Witherspoon as Cheryl, Reese, and Laura Dern as Cheryl's mother, Bobby. Tiny Beautiful Things was adapted for the stage by Nia Vardalos, who also starred in the role of Sugar. The play was directed by Thomas Kail and debuted at the Public Theater in New York City. Strayed is also the host of the New York Times hit podcast Sugar Calling, and also Dear Sugars, which she co-hosted with Steve Almond. Woo. I love the Almonds. I love both Almonds. So.
Oh, I love them too. I miss making the podcast with Steve, mostly because it meant I got to see him a few times a year. Yeah.
Oh, right. I want to ask
Yeah.
you about that. They're actually in my apartment in Boston today writing as like a husband and wife escaping from
Oh,
the
are they? Are they?
yes. They're like, and I'm like, what should I ask Cheryl? Should I be scared? They were like, no, she's so great. You guys
Please tell them I said hi and send my love. I'm glad to hear that they're holed up writing there.
they were like, okay, and there's a free apartment. We're going to go write. And
Yeah.
Steve is a great political writer, y'all, and also very funny. So you should all check out Steve Almond. Back to you. Your essays have been published in the Best American
And
Essay.
Erin Almond is also a great writer.
Oh
Erin's
my
a
gosh.
novelist and amazing. Everyone should go get her new book.
Okay, I'm really deeply, deeply, deeply ashamed right now because Erin is my friend for 20 years and I pride myself on supporting women. And I'm like, Steve, oops, Erin will never, I hope she never watches this. Erin's first book, Witch's Dance, just came out last October. Yeah. It's fantastic. It's about Paganini and a man who thinks he's Paganini, and it's very passionate and there's
Erin's amazing. Yeah.
A lot of illicitness in it too. So thank you.
No, right. Don't worry.
I'm just gonna say all the amazing things. We're done. We're done here.
We're done. We're done. I mean, the bio. Go to my website and read my bio.
Yeah, she's amazing. Obviously, we all know Cheryl is amazing. I'm going to put the bio away now so we can actually talk to Cheryl. But you have written all the memoirs, all the essays, all the fiction, all the movies, all the plays. We're so excited to be able to talk to you today. I'm basically, obviously, like a big puppy. I'm so excited. I'm like,
you're so sweet. Thank you.
I just call him as I see him, girl. So one of the questions I wanted to ask, and start with something so easy, is about Wild. And I think it sort of speaks to my fangirl moment in the elevator when I was struck dumb with awe and not even able to say I'm also a writer, is that your books are so influential to people. Like Torch, I remember reading on the banks of Lake Harriet in Minneapolis. And I'm like married, unhappily married, 20 something, reading this and thinking, somebody else out there has my life, like understands grief, understands what it can do to a family, the way it blows a family apart. And it was so gorgeously written. And I just had that moment when you finish reading a great book, when you're just like, you just say thank you to it. Like you can hug it and you say thank you. And then came Wild. And just at the risk of talking too much about me, I have read Wild probably 6 times at different stages of my life, different chapters. And I feel like many classics, it has a sort of a different meaning presented depending what stage you're at in your life. The last time I read it, my mom had breast cancer and she was fatally ill. And when I read it then, it was so helpful to me to have your voice in my ear at that time and feel like I was going through this very game-changing experience with a friend who I had just never met except in an elevator. And so I'm wondering, like, what is it like to be sort of like the lightning rod for every woman in the world who has lost a mom? Like, do you get in an elevator and people are just like, I lost my mom, thank you so much for your book? Or how is that experience for you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for all those many kind words. And I didn't know when I began writing that I would become that kind of figure to people, that my work would be read in a way that was sort of helpful on an emotional standpoint, that was in some ways therapeutic or consoling. And yet in retrospect, I look back and I think, well, how could I have not known? Because I know that books have done that for me, that books have been my deepest companions, my deepest consolation at times, my deepest sort of, like you just described, sitting down Lake Harriet, the banks of Lake Harriet, and going, somebody else is out there like me. And I think that so many writers throughout time have made that observation, that when we tell the truest stories, and by that I don't necessarily mean nonfiction, when whether the form be fiction or nonfiction, or what a mix of them, the two, is that telling the truth is about telling the truth about what it means to be human, what it means to love, what it means to lust, what it means to lose, what it means to fail and do the wrong thing and then make it right again and triumph and all of those things. Like, I always knew that that's what literature gave us. And so when my books started, and I think a lot of people obviously really came to know me through Wild, but that wasn't the beginning for me of people saying to me, your book saved my life. That did begin with Torch, and it even began earlier than that with a couple of essays that were published that were in Best American Essays called The Love of My Life and Heroine. So I started to get this feedback that was about, sometimes about the literary content. Sometimes somebody would say like, oh, your sentences are beautiful. But a lot of times it was about, my heart is broken too. And I read that essay or I read that novel and you made me feel seen. And so I started to realize like I was kind of, that there was like a kind of there like a self-help aspect to my work, even though I don't consider myself in the self-help world. And then of course, then with Sugar and Tiny Beautiful Things, I was actually helping people. I was giving people advice, but using stories to do it.
Yes, I always loved reading the Dear Sugars, even when the situations didn't pertain directly to my life. I would feel wiser for having read them, and I would feel better equipped in case I, suddenly accidentally had a child later, and hadn't planned to, like, oh, maybe
Right.
I can do this and still write, or, any of the subjects that you gave voice to. Do you think this is so interesting? When you set out to write the first essays and when you set out to write Torch, I'm going to rewind even before Wild. Was that your aspiration as a writer, to sort of cast that element of yourself out across the void and help people feel less alone? Or were you just trying to tell a good story? Like, what was the aspiration?
The aspiration was to be a great writer. I had absolutely, like real ambition. And I wanted to be a great writer. I wanted to be among the great writers. And so what I did is I apprenticed myself to the craft of writing for years and years and years, and read everything and wrote a bunch of stuff and did, in the end, had to really, I guess, in so many ways, just sort of humble myself before the universe and realize, it wasn't really up to me if I would ever be considered one of the great writers, that the only thing I could do is write to the best of my abilities, to be as rigorous as I could with the writer's craft and as courageous as I could with my own heart and my own mind, and tell the truest truth. And so that's what I did. I didn't, I think that there was a point along the way, and I think most writers learn this at some point along the way, is that you can't control what happens to that work when it's out in the world. So I never thought, well, I want to make an audience feel a certain way or think a certain thing of me. It was rather, I want to, for myself, accomplish this thing, make this sentence beautiful, make this emotion raw and real and true. And so those were the goals I had. They were always about the writing and not about the reception.
I have so many writer geek questions based on that answer. Do you feel, I have my own opinions about this, and I'm sure all the viewers are thinking, yes, Cheryl, life goal checked. You are one of the great writers. Do you feel when you sit down and face that? I mean, I'm not kidding. Like, the body of work that you have produced has helped a lot of people and done so through words. And that's what writers aspire to do, to reach other people through words and to make the thing be the purest, truest thing it can be. You're welcome. But we've checked that life box off for you. When you sit down every day to work, or if you work every day, do you consider that you've achieved that goal? Like, can you say, okay, if an air conditioner fell on me tomorrow, I can, go into the great yonder thinking, I did what I set out to do with some of my work?
It's interesting that you're asking this, because I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Maybe it's the coronavirus, just this, I guess I've always thought a lot about my own mortality, because my mom died when she was 45 and I'm 51. So like when she died, I just thought, like, I won't live beyond 45. I had this thing that a lot of people who lose their moms young have. And then, so I think I probably think of my own mortality more than the average person. It's not like I'm, like insane about it, but it's present. And then the coronavirus, I've been afraid of catching it, like a lot of people this idea of becoming sick and dying has become kind of like much more in the forefront of our daily lives as we see that count every day, how many people have died, so forth. And but one of the things, Jenna, that I have thought in this time is there are a lot of reasons I don't want to die. But one of them is I need to write at least 2 more books. I need to write at least 2 more books. So I'm not ready yet. I don't feel like there's still so much more I have to say. Now, of course, once I write those 2 books, I'll probably want 2 more. I'll probably be like, please, universe, let me stay. But there isn't that sense. Like, I certainly don't have a sense of like, well, I spoke my piece. And I think that's I think that's always a good sign, in an art, any kind of artist, that you're always left feeling like I have more to say, that there's that you write a book and you put everything in it and you give everything. And there is this period, at least for me, that I think like, okay, I'm done, I'm retiring. And then some time passes and you have these other ideas and you have these other stories that you need to tell. And so that's where I'm at right now, is I have a novel and a memoir, both in my head. Some of it is on the page or on the computer screen, but I need to do those things.
We're really glad to hear that. We don't want you to die either. We would like you to stay alive for at least 300 years and write at least, I'm going to say at least 35 or 40 more books. If you can do that.
Oh yeah.
That would be really helpful. We would that.
I'd just be happy with 3 or 4 more.
One of my, no, we need you to write more than that. I'm sorry, Cheryl. We're going to have to budget more time for that.
Okay.
One of my friends, Stephen Kiernan, who's a novelist, I know he's watching, he likes to quote another writer at me whose name I have forgotten, on his deathbed when told, he had like only X amount of days left to write. He thought, oh, I have X amount of pages left to live. Like that's how much time I have left, is I can
interesting.
X amount of pages in that amount of time. And I do get that. I would be very indignant if I got handed a death sentence, because I like to be alive for many reasons, like food. But also, I think like there are the things that only we can download through our unique channels that we want to give to other people. And so it's such a great privilege to spend a life doing that.
Do you get that feeling though? I mean, sometimes I have this almost like this urgent feeling of these stories inside of me that have to get out. And of course, it seems so much easier when you're writing the story in your head than it is when you actually are writing. It's much slower going to actually have to write it. But I sometimes feel that sense of like wanting to burst with story. Or sometimes it's even as small as like an image or a little anecdote that I just feel like I have to tell that. I have to tell that.
Is that how your ideas come to you most of the time, that blow up into bigger things, into novels, into memoir?
Yeah, I mean, I think that very often it's a kind of moment or a simple, like very often a kind of emotion between 2 people or an exchange between 2 people that I think is it's something that is deeper than what we see on the surface, and that almost always is the thing that compels me. In the case of the novel I'm working on, it's not so much that as it is a situation that I've always been fascinated by. 2 women who love the same man. And, that triad has always been cast as one where the women are in competition with each other and hate each other. And I've always been interested in the fact that those women have more they have more in common than they do with the man. I mean, I always am interested in sort of taking a situation and turning it, reversing its kind of traditional meaning and exploring it. So I'm doing that. I just, ideas come from different places, but very often it's just a seed. And then of course it turns into a whole bunch of other things as you write.
So I'm so curious about this. When I read other authors' work, when I was a little girl, I had these puzzles that some of the pieces had recognizable shapes. So you would have a puzzle that would have like a mushroom or an apple embedded in the nonsensical pieces. And when I read a novel, I always try and figure out what was the genesis, like what was the seed embedded in the rest of the novel. Are the seeds that are embedded, or the ideas that you're talking about, are they things that people could easily point to, do you think? And, say, oh, obviously that's where it came from. Or is it one of these, like a sidewise conversation that you have like tucked in somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting, I think about that too. And one of the questions I often ask my students when I'm teaching, and also when I'm interviewing other writers, is like, what is, so in that book or that essay or that story, what is the sentence that means the most to you?
Hmm.
And very often it is the kind of, it's like a taproot sentence. And it doesn't necessarily mean that sentence was there at the beginning and everything else grew from it, but it is almost always a sentence that you wouldn't necessarily as an outsider be like, oh, that's what this whole thing is about. But it's meaningful to the writer because it in some ways is like the core desire, or the core wound, or the core truth. And almost always I have, in a book, it's usually not just one sentence, but it's, if you asked me like, okay, go and go through Wild and Torch and Tiny Beautiful Things and find, 5 sentences in each book that mean the most to you, I would have no trouble doing that. Because it's about, to me, like those essential things that you both start from and reach to as a writer.
Are those the ones that the readers respond to usually the most and pluck out when they're saying their favorite lines?
Well, sometimes what's interesting to me, I really am fascinated by the sentences that the readers really pay attention to. And especially in a book, one of the great privileges and pleasures of writing, having been the author of Wild, is so many people have read it that a lot of people talk to you about it. And so you get a lot of feedback, and you can actually, it's kind of like, you're almost like a scientist. You could like, there's like a sample size that's large enough that it's not just individual preference. And I can tell you that there are a few, the sentences that people talk to me about the most in Wild are the sentences that scared me to write. And that I thought, oh, my first thought when I wrote it was, I can't write that, and I will take it out. I'll take that sentence out before the book is published. And of course, then I left it in, and it's the sentence that people are like, So one example in Wild is there's a scene where I talk about my family and I spreading my mom's ashes. And we scattered them into this flower bed that we made back in the woods in Minnesota, where I grew up. And at the very end, I couldn't let go of all the ashes. I had these little last pieces, these burnt, like seemed like little bone shards in my hand. And I put them to my mouth and swallowed them. And when I wrote that, it was like being jolted with electricity, and I got it from my computer and I was like, okay, I can't write that. That's too weird. And then I left it in, and people all over the world have talked to me about that. This thing that I thought I was so savage and so weird, so many people all over the world have said, I did that too. Or I can't believe you wrote that. I did that too. I thought I was the only one. And then one day I got an email from somebody, and it was titled Too Much. And the woman said, I was loving your book, but it's just disgusting that you swallowed those ashes. And I stopped reading the book, and I'm not going to read the rest because it's too much. And I thought it was so interesting, because once I got over my kind of wounded feelings about like a mean email, I was like, she's right. Like, that's what our job is, right? Like, it's a little too much. And sometimes it makes us throw the book across the room and say we hated the book. And other times it touches a nerve on us, and we see ourselves, or we see humanity in a new light. We see the other in a new light. And so, yeah, I do think our job is to be a little too much sometimes.
That is beautiful. I think life is too much sometimes. And if you're trying to chronicle life in an accurate way, which as a memoirist you are doing, then again, the purpose of writing is to reach across the void of between yourself and another person, that sort of intangible void that is sometimes this big and then sometimes eternally big.
Yeah.
So you're not alone in your experiences. And I think the things that we feel most ashamed about, or most humiliated by, or try to hide the most, are actually the things we feel the most relieved about in finding them in books, whether it's fiction or in memoir. I would bet that the reader who wrote you that mean email actually had done the same thing or had wanted to and had just not sort of figured out how to square that with him or herself, the too much thing. I love getting, reviews from people that are like, this book was disgusting. And I get actually was my favorite. It was like on Twitter when the actors were reading their bad reviews. I always wanted to do this for writers so we could read our worst reviews. My favorite review of all time of my first book, in a way, was a reader on Amazon who said, this was the most disgusting book I have ever read. It had so much sex in it. I left it in my hotel room, and I wrote back to this person, which I rarely do on Amazon. And I said, I hope you at least put it in the recycle bin or gave it to the chambermaid so that, the word could spread about this disgusting book. But I feel like the people who are sending you those emails are really saying, you touched a nerve. You touched a raw nerve, and that's what it's all about, right? So
it is. And I mean, I think what's so funny about it too is, as you know, like all writing is like, well, it's maybe it is too much. Like, I mean, when I write things, sometimes I'm like, is that too much? Okay, is it not? I mean, like, I think that people, when they read a book, they think like the writer is just like, here it is, and I am right, and it's beautiful. Like, there's so much stuff out there that I'm like, maybe you're right. Like, maybe I shouldn't have used fuck this many times. Maybe I shouldn't have called people sweet pea as sugar. Maybe like, I'm always like, well, maybe you're right. Like, who knows? And this what you see here on the page is where I was at that moment in time. And when I read, so after Wild was published, by that point, like, there were more audiobooks and everything. And they asked me, I didn't get to do the audiobook for Wild, but they asked me to do the audiobook for Torch. And that was such an interesting experience because by then, I hadn't read Torch for, I don't know, like 7 years, and then there I am in the studio and I'm reading these sentences that I labored over, that I just, I almost had memorized the book by the time I finished writing it. And yet years later, when I'm reading it, they're like, oh yeah, wow, these sentences. And, at that woman in the studio would have revised some of those sentences, would have revised some of those scenes. And that's what I love about being a writer. It's always, there's like what that work that we read by any writer is, it's always like, that is who they were at a moment in time. That is the best they had to give at that moment. And then you go on and you do something else.
I feel fairly forgiving of the mistakes I made in earlier work or ways that I might have redone it if I were to do it now, because I think I really did do the best I could. And I sweated this book out of my head for like 3 years. And
yeah,
it is a snapshot. It's like when I go back and reread books on my shelf, I can see all the notations I made in the margins, when I was 10 years younger. Like if I was Wild, I have all of my, notations in the margins, and Torch, same thing. And I think, oh, that's what I was thinking then when I was on the shores of Lake Harriet reading Torch then. And I see this situation like a pivot now. It's a little different. So we have like a million reader questions. I didn't even get to ask all my own questions. Thanks, readers. But they're really good questions. One of them is actually about memoir. I was explaining to somebody recently the difference between writing fiction and memoir, which I am a total novice at. I just finished my first memoir and gave it to my agent like 2 days ago for her birthday because she asked for that.
Congrats.
Thank you. I was like, wow, it's done. I cried. I always cry when you finish something.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course.
For its incompleteness and also for the fact that you made something. But I was like, okay, so writing fiction to me is about trying to hide my underwear all the time, right? So it's kind of like, I want there to be a purpose, and I'm trying to convey a message about something through this story, through these characters I hope readers love and want to strangle and also love. But the actual intent has to be cloaked. Whereas in memoir, I felt like what you're talking about, the writing the thing that is too much. As a fiction writer, it was hard for me to sort of break that and be like, world, underpants, but I feel like that is what being a memoirist is much more about than being a fiction writer. You have to be like, here's my underwear. It's weird looking. I wear the granny pants. It has a hole. Do yours have that too? Or no underwear or whatever, like whatever's, right? So do you have a preference for writing memoir and essay over fiction? And one of the readers wanted to know, how do you sift through all the details of your life and decide which ones to include in the retelling of your own experience?
Right. Yeah. So first, I mean, I think I love both fiction and and memoir and personal essay. You know, those the nonfiction fiction divide to me is not about craft. You know, you have to achieve the same thing on the page. You have to, if in the case of fiction, you have to make people believe those characters are real. Like my favorite question I get when people ask me about Torch is, well, what happens, you know, what happens to Claire and Joshua next? And I'm like, nothing, you know, the book is over. They don't exist. You know, I love that. And you know, but the same thing happens when you're writing about the self. When you started reading Wild, you didn't know Cheryl, and it didn't really matter to you if Cheryl is an actual person living in the world or a fictional character that somebody made up. You have to create that sense of like that really clear sense of this being a human with a real beating heart, you know. And so for me, the craft is the same, but the toolbox is different in terms of what can you draw on to achieve that effect. When I'm writing nonfiction, I'm having to really scour the actual. I'm having to scour what really happened, what I'm able to, what am I able to remember to the best of my abilities to tell with factual, actual, legitimate truth, to say this really happened, and I'm going to tell you a story about it. And I'm also, in the course of telling you that story, going to reach for that thing that all great literature reaches for, is that sense of transcendence. That it's not just a story about me, you know, that it moves from my life to yours. And the way you do that is you find that universal thread, but you have to do that in fiction too. Like, we've all read fictional characters that we ask, why do I care about him, or why do I care about her? And the fiction writer has to answer that in the work, in the sentences, in the way that character is built. And of course, fiction, we always forget that actually fiction, most fiction, not all, but most fiction is actually a blend of memoir and imagination. And, you know, we draw upon our lives. It's not like, you know, Philip Roth's characters have nothing in common with Philip Roth. They have a lot in common with him, right? And he takes the self and says, here's a guy who's kind of like me, and I'm going to put him in this situation and see what happens. And I'm not going to have allegiance to the actual. I'm going to have allegiance to the mission of my story, or what unfurls as I write. But so, you know, I think that in some ways, that question, like, well, how am I going to tell the story? What I'm always trying to answer is, what is going to be the most effective way?
Hmm.
So in both Torch and Wild, we have a mother who dies young of cancer. And Torch is a story about a family. And it's a story about a young woman who's got some things in common with me, but I'm not her, and a young man, and a 38-year-old man, and who I now consider young, but when I was writing it, you know, was an older man. And what happens to them when the person who's most essential to them dies. And so that was, you know, both inside my heart, because that happened to me and my family, and totally outside myself too. And so I was trying to tell a different kind of story. It wouldn't have been served by it just being from my perspective. By the time years later I was writing Wild, it was like, no, I'm going to tell the story of my grief. I'm going to tell the story about how I was wrecked and how I found my way back. And that was the most powerful way to tell that story. It would have been ridiculous if I had made that woman who hiked the Pacific Crest Trail a fictional character and then been like, oh yeah, she's kind of based on me. You know, it just didn't, you know, I think that, you know, that positioning you're talking about, like showing your underwear, that's what I love about memoir and personal essay, is the writer is standing right there, and there is not a screen between you and the reader. You're standing there saying, this is actually me. In fiction, there's a little screen. It's like, yeah, it's kind of me and kind of not, usually.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. Or at least you can say there is. Like in fiction,
Yeah.
like, you know, baldest stuff is out there, but at least I can say, oh, I just made that up. It's fiction, and nobody really knows except for a handful of people what's true and what's not true. I think, I am heartened by this idea. And I actually found it less constraining than I thought to write memoir, because I knew what had happened, so I didn't have to make shit up, which was like a great burden to
Right. Yeah.
and you're responsible for inventing the story. And I think for many writers that is actually the hardest part, is keeping that narrative arc spinning so the reader doesn't get bored. But there was also, after almost 50 years of, plowing through all of this and writing professionally for almost 30 years, such a sense of relief in being able to put aside the mask and just say, this is how I was feeling. And you're talking about it being too much. I definitely understand that it reverberates with me, because I think it's a new thing for me to be able to put on the page exactly what I was doing or what I was feeling, or open myself up this way. But I've been talking with my writer cohort, and they've been saying, like, this is the thing you should be writing about. This is, the raw hangnail, or the, emotional hangnail, or the times that you were like the most wrecked. I do think that is what speaks across the void and makes things transcendent. One of our viewers, who I know happens to be from Kansas, actually, she had written, "You amaze me with Wild. Losing our moms at such an early age is beyond difficult. Thank you." And
thank you. Thank you.
She asks if there are authors you admire. You mentioned in the beginning of the conversation that you wanted to be one of the great authors, and sort of defined it sense as people who are able to capture that transcendence so that everybody can plug into the story. Who is that person for you, or those people?
Well, Alice Munro is my absolute favorite author. I love her just eternally and so much. And every time you said earlier about rereading work and finding new things in it, every time I read Alice Munro's stories, I am blown away and I see something new. So she was really important to me. A lot of writers were. And that's the thing, is when I was in my 20s, I just immersed myself in literature. I read. I mean, I still read, but back then I read I'm still awake to what I'm reading. So don't get me wrong. But back then I was just so hungry to learn how to write. And like I said, apprentice myself to the craft, that I was just like, how did they put that together? I loved Edna O'Brien was another really influential person to be. Raymond Carver, who my son is named after Carver. Toni Morrison, amazing. I mean, I remember reading Beloved and just thinking like, okay. Oh, and also I read The Bluest Eye when I was like 19. It really is one of the books that changed my life. I mean, I saw the world differently after reading that book. And also I saw what you can do on the page. So there's so many, I mean, it's just almost too many. Mary Gateskill was powerful to me. I mean, just lots of people. And I'm missing a lot of them here as we say, as I speak, because there's just too many to name. And I think that that's the key, is like, if you're an aspiring writer or at the beginning of your writing life, especially, is like, just go find, it's not me saying Alice Munro is great. It's you finding that writer who makes you feel like, wow, this is great.
A lot of short story writers in your pantheon.
Yeah. It's interesting. So part of that is about generational, back when I was becoming a writer, it wasn't like, I mean, there were memoirs for sure, but it wasn't, the way to, it never occurred to me I was going to be a memoirist. I was a fiction writer. I was a prose writer. Most MFA departments back then only had, it was either fiction or poetry. You were in fiction or poetry. And so I learned how to write by studying fiction. And I think that when I teach memoir, especially like at the graduate level, I always assign short stories alongside essays and memoirs, because I do think that like I said earlier, like you have to do the same thing. So you have to develop the character. Just because the character happens to be you and your brother and your dad, it doesn't mean that it's those people are no more real to your reader than, somebody you made up. And so you have to do the same things. You have to learn how to be concise and dense, and you've got to know pace, and you've got to know how to, sort of show the heart on the page. All of that stuff is still there. So I teach and study prose, not specific to the genre.
Do you ever get pushback from writing memoir or essays from readers, from family members? Some of our viewers are attempting to write memoir. I was very clever writing my memoir in that I was writing about a dog. And not only that, my dog, who probably could have read if he were still alive, but is now not here. So I chose my subject wisely. I'm not going to get any pushback from him. And all the other people in the book, I'm basically writing love letters to, saying like, thank you for supporting me while I was caring for this super, super old dog. But do you ever get pushback from people you knew, IRL, or from readers saying like, oh, how can you describe your family this way? And how do you answer these charges?
Yeah. I always say the most unfortunate, the most difficult thing about memoir is the unfortunate fact that other people exist. Because it's the hard thing. It's the hardest part. Because of course, in writing your story, you inevitably have to write about uh, the people in your life, and there's always the essential, the mother and the father, the people who raised you or loved you or wounded you or left you or supported you or didn't. All of those things have to be revealed, and they have to be revealed in a way that is both honest and also, I think, kind. And that's really hard. So yeah, there's no one answer to that question. I think that it really depends on your situation. What I have found is, a lot of times people won't want to write the truth about a relationship or about a person because that person is awful and abusive and harmful. Like in the case of, for example, I've written about my father being abusive. And I realized, that I had to go really deep. Like, well, what are my intentions? Are my intentions revenge or anger or trying to embarrass him or make him pay? No, the answer is no to all of those things. My intention was to tell the truth about my life and my experience, and to do it with as much love and compassion for him as possible. And so, if I write from that standpoint, I honestly always feel like I have the right to tell that story. And sometimes people will still have that abusive person in their life, and what I say is like, well, I think that if somebody, I mean, if somebody's trying to prevent you from telling the truth about your life, they're probably not such a great person to have in your life. But of course, you have to ask the question, what's the price you're willing to pay? Are you willing to have your mother not speak to you for 10 years? Sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no. What is the price you're willing to pay to be silent? What is the price you're willing to pay to tell the truth? And get some clarity about that. Not before you write it, before you publish it. And that's one thing I want to say about this that I think is really important. I should have led with this actually, is that a lot of people freak out. They're like, I can't tell the truth about my mom or my sister or whatever, because they'll come get me and everyone will be mad at me. And I'm like, well, your computer does not have a direct connection to the pages of the New Yorker. You've got to just write it. And then sometimes after you've written it, you realize, oh, well, the thing I wrote actually isn't so bad. It's actually pretty loving, or it's actually less exposing of them as it is exposing of me. So first see what it is that you have and write it, like write as if nobody will ever read it, and then decide what goes out into the world and and then you can make decisions. There are things that I have not written. I mean, a lot of people consider me like a really fearless writer, and because I have written so honestly a lot about myself and a lot of people, and that's another thing, I expose myself more than I expose anyone else. But times when I have been brave about other people, I really for every time I've done that, I've also decided, I don't have a right to tell that story because it would hurt this person, or it's not my story to tell. So it's not about just like everything you get to have on the page. Like, I do think that you have to think deeply about the consequences.
That is really great advice. And I think you just gave relief to a lot of people who are struggling with these issues, both in fiction and nonfiction. I always think the joke about this is on the writer, that if you write fiction, people think you're always writing about yourself anyway. And if you write memoir, people say, oh, you just made that up. So people are just not going to be happy either way, you know, and then people will, when I was writing
all the time,
right. And I was,
Yeah.
even in fiction, I had decided not to write very much about my mom. And then my mom was always mad that she didn't appear in the fiction.
Yeah.
She was like, why did you have to kill the mother? Why couldn't the mother just be on a cruise? And I'm like, well, because I had to get her out of the way so I could write the book, you know. But
I love it.
Yeah. Advice to get clear about what your motives are, and then what the potential consequences are. I had a situation with my second book like that I was in therapy for 6 years before I could even talk to the person who was involved, who was featured in that book, about whether or not I could publish it or mm-hmm. what the reaction would be when I did, because I was going to do it anyway. But
right,
there's a lot of weighing and sifting, and writers do have that responsibility, I think, to tell the truth, and then to also think why and how is this going to boomerang. So thank you for that. Do you, because you have so many channels into which you project your talent when you're writing, you know, novel, memoir, essays, what is your writing life like now? Do you commit to one channel and stay in it? Or is it sort of a kaleidoscope? Like you wake up and think, I don't feel like working on a novel today. I'm going to go over here and write an essay.
Yeah, it depends on what phase I'm at with things. You know, sometimes it'll be like a little bit of a kaleidoscope, like I'll work on this, I'll work on that. But then pretty definitely, like once I am working on something, I have to, it usually goes better if I stay focused on that. And that might mean that doesn't mean I never have more than one project going on. Right now I do. I'm writing a novel. I've started both the novel and the memoir, but I've set them both aside because I'm writing a screenplay. But whatever is on the front burner, I'm focusing on. So right now I'm writing a screenplay. I'll be done with it within the next couple of weeks. And then I'll, you know, spend a week, you know, on the couch watching TV or something. And then I'll go back and I'll be in the novel, and then I'll stay in that, because I do think that so much for me, it's like John Gardner says that writing fiction is like creating a vivid and continuous dream. And I think that that's really true, that my mind has to stay in that narrative or that story, in those characters' minds, for me to really see it all the way through. So yeah, I try to focus, but I, you know, then along the way I'll stop and write an essay, or, you know, sometimes they're practical, you know, I'll be like, somebody asked me to write something and I want to do it, so I'll take a break and do it. Yeah.
I love the staying in the dream thing.
Yeah.
I'm working on a book. I read everything only if it's connected to the book, and then I watch things on TV that are connected to the book, and I have a soundtrack that I put on Spotify that is connected to the book.
Oh, cool.
Myself in the dream, so even when I'm not actively writing, I'm still in the sort of virtual reality game of living in that novel or that place. Do you have tips like that or tricks like that you use outside of the writing room to keep yourself in the dream?
You know, I don't. One thing I can tell you is that writing is really hard for me.
Thank God.
It's so hard. It's so hard. And for me, it's not so much, you know, because once I'm in the dream, like I'm like in, and that's the good stuff. For me, the hard part is believing that the dream still exists. You know, the time before you sink into the dream, that like you can get there again. And every time I have to begin something new, or I get stuck in you know, the midst of a book or an essay or a story or whatever, like I have to say, Cheryl, you have to just, this is how it feels. You know, how it feels to write is to feel like you can't write. That's true for me. It feels a lot of the time miserable and difficult, and like I'm a failure, and like I can't do it again. That like the imposter syndrome looms large in my mind. Like there's this part of me at my core that thinks, okay, I tricked you guys. I tricked you all those things that I managed to write up until now. Like somehow, I don't know how it happened. It just sort of happened outside of me, and I can't do it again. And the ruse is up. You know, I mean, so for me, the biggest part of writing is not staying in the dream, but trusting that I'll get there again. And once I'm there, then it's golden and I can write. But just staying disciplined, keeping faith with the practice. And so the rituals I have about that are very practical. They're just about things like saying to myself, you can do this. It feels hard, but just write, just start. Just if you don't know where to begin, just start writing sentences. And just getting in that habit of doing it rather than fretting about it is a really key thing for me.
It's such a relief to hear a writer of your stature admit, I'm sorry, it's a bit schadenfreude, but it is such a relief to hear you admit, like, it's hard for you. And I say this, I always feel a bit chagrined because it's not like you're digging ditches or something. Like, I had a lady living next to me in the house here in Minnesota who is caring for a whole house full of physically challenged men who all lived in the house. And she saw me slogging out in my writer pants one day to the mailbox and coming back in and being all crabby because I had to write a scene. And she said, oh, how's the writing going? And I was just like, it's fine. And she's like, oh, I wish I could do what you do. It's so nice to just sit there and make up stories all day. And all the writers I tell this story to get, that the impossibility of that statement, that it actually isn't that easy. But at the same time, every time I think about this, I think, what I do is not as hard as caring for a house of physically challenged adult men, like, every day. But it is hard. I mean, it is, I think, a daunting thing to do. For me, it is about being afraid that the fictional dream will evaporate while I'm doing some human thing, like going to the mailbox or sleeping or eating. And so when people talk to me when I'm writing a book for like 3 years, I'm really crabby because I don't want people to interrupt me. I'm running lines in my head all the time, But there are those awful, awful days where you sit down and everything you write is just shit. And you're just like, all right, this is part of the process. If you're getting to this phase, you're doing it right, but it never feels like better,
Yeah.
So,
and even some days you haven't written shit. And what I find is it feels like you did. So like, you don't know if you did or not. And yeah, so it's very, I mean, I also think for me, because I often feel this way too, like, this is so hard. And then I'm like shamed because I'm like, well, as I said in Write Like a Motherfucker, well, coal mining is harder. And what I've realized since I wrote that line is, well, the thing is it's not a competition. And also there are ways in which writing is actually way harder than digging ditches. It's hard in a different way. And it's hard in a very particular way that essentially asks us to confront our own anxieties and failures every day.
Well, you're digging in yourself too.
Yeah.
You're digging for that honesty. Like, you're digging out the coal of your emotional core. And I do think that is often hard, but the days I'm talking about mostly are just cranky days where I feel like because I didn't accurately convey what I wanted to convey. By the way, Write Like a Motherfucker, I have the Write Like a Motherfucker mug in my apartment in Boston, and I use it I allow myself to use it only when I am actually writing, like, not on Facebook, not writing nonfiction, not writing, like, I have to be writing a new thing. When you sit down to write something new, I love my mug. I'm like, today I have my Wild Turkey Capital of Minnesota, Caledonia mug.
I love it.
It ain't the same, but it's okay. When you sit down to write like motherfucker or otherwise, when you start something new, how do you start? I mean, everybody wants to know, like, how do you start?
How do you start? Starting is the hardest part for me. I hem and I haw and I make excuses and I do other things and I get distracted. And then I finally say, you got to do this. And I try to give myself positive self-talk. I try to say, like, you want to do this. This is your dream. The dream, we talk about trying to enter the writing dream, but there's a different kind of dream. And that is the dream that I had as a child, that I would get to do this. And look at me, I get to do this, so to remember that it's a pleasure and a privilege, and to realize that there's a place that I get to that's unlike anything else in my life when it's going well. And the only way to get there is by doing the hard work. It's kind of like visiting the most wondrous, like, waterfall deep in the forest, but to get to that waterfall you have to walk over like rock slides and through mud pits and past trees. It's like Dorothy's journey of like the flying monkeys and the trees that grab you. And the price you pay is great, but the payoff is great too. And so I try to remember that and just push through. And almost always, once I get started, before you know it, I feel like, oh, this is kind of fun. I forgot I was writing. And not every day, some days are just like, oh, I put in my time, I'll be back tomorrow. well done. And other days it's lovely. And so I just try to remember that.
Yeah.
I take the long view.
Right. And then you have like some of the days you have your monster on, like the monster backpack. Right?
Exactly.
I had
Totally.
to bring monster in somehow, but I think, walking up that rocky slope, it was reminding me of like the wild views. Do you write every day? And one of the readers asked like many moons ago, and this interview is going to be 8 hours long soon. So I just wanted to give you a time check, but I will keep you here for about 10 hours talking to you. So about 8 hours ago, a reader asked, with so many demands on your time, and the more successful you are, the more those demands grow. How do you find the time to write? How has that affected your writing life?
Oh, it's been so hard. I mean, because what happened to me too is I unexpectedly became a public figure in a way that I didn't anticipate. And by that, I mean, like, I do things like I'm an activist. I do lots of public speaking. I have a whole sort of accidental career as a public speaker. Like I didn't know that would happen, but it has. And I enjoy speaking. And teaching, like I teach workshops sometimes, like, so since Wild Success, like all of these, there are all these kind of areas of my life that have gotten bigger. I was an activist for, since way back, but that's gotten bigger. And the public speaking, like I said, a whole new career. And then also during this time, I also have 2 kids. My kids are teenagers now, they're 14 and 16, but this whole time that I've been writing books and trying to concentrate has been done during a time when I'm in, real mothering, some heavy lifting of motherhood, which also turns out to be a rather demanding gig. And so, it's a lot. And I will say too, that part of it, I love to do other things. So I was really involved in the making of the movie. I was really involved in the making of the play. I'm a yes person. And what that did is it kept putting writing the next book on the back burner.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't regret saying, the podcast too. I've had 2 hit podcasts. So I've done all these things. The next thing, I guess I'm going to have to start a band or something. Right. But I've done all these things, no regrets. They were all cool, fun things that taught me a lot. But they did keep me from writing that next book. So that's what I'm doing. I'm really now, in some ways, it's been really pretty interesting. This pandemic has forced me, like, suddenly public speaking career gone. It's forced me to be home in my room working on the screenplay and then on the next book. So it's kind of cool that, like, that, it took a terrible virus to make me really get back. I mean, of course, I've written a bunch of stuff, but just to finish the next book, I've written short stories and essays, but to finish the next book has taken sustained attention that I haven't had until now.
Right. So people think it takes a village, but really it takes a pandemic to, like,
it does
down in
well,
chair.
And that's it. It's like with writing, it takes the opposite of a village. I mean, that's the thing, is it's like, I've been like partying in the village for, several years now. And I'm like, okay, bye village. I'm going to go in my room now and write the next book.
Yeah, no, same here. I do a lot of public speaking. I've been envying your mic the whole time. I'm like, she has a mic at home. How does one make that happen? But there was that one week at the beginning of COVID where I watched everything get canceled.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my God, what the fuck am I going to do now? I'm going to have to write another book. And then I decided, like, I accidentally started a company instead, so I don't have to write the next book. Haha. But I wrote anyway. So I might have to do a little lightning round of questions with you.
I know. I'm I give long answers. I'm so sorry.
Oh my God. No, I love it. Oh my God. Please don't ever say that. I just think this also happened with Anna Quinlan, actually. Like, we were having like this fabulous, like, meaty, textured, lovely conversation about writing. And I was like, oh, I forgot to ask you about the Pulitzer. Can you answer that quickly? Also, movie, also whatever. So this is the thing about talking to, like, incredibly successful, talented writers, is you have this lightning round, like, can we talk in 2 minutes about Oprah, the movie, and the play, and also Reese and Laura? And then, we can, like, go back to our regular scheduled programming. But you did drop the O-bomb in this conversation at one point, and also just mention the movie, the Wild movie, which so many of us love, and that you were involved with, and also with the play of Tiny Beautiful Things. So in a lightning round, what was the Oprah call like? What was the movie experience like? And what was having your book turned into a play like?
The Oprah call was as every bit as exciting as you would guess. She called me up on my cell phone without warning. Nobody knew she was going to do that. She said she read my book and we had a lovely chat. And she said she wanted to restart her book club for it. And I was on my book tour. I was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in a hotel, and I was ecstatic. And I met her about 5 days later. I went to her house and she interviewed me and we had a wonderful time and we became friends. You know, she's become a friend of mine really over the years, and I love her. I'm so proud of her, about her O magazine cover of Breonna Taylor, and she's just, you know, it's extraordinary. So she's extraordinary and every bit as inspiring and intelligent and amazing as all the people who love her know. What was the second question? The movie. I was really involved with the film. Reese and Laura have become dear, dear friends of mine, and I was, you know, I just had an extraordinary experience, really being part of that filmmaking. And Nick Hornby wrote the script, and I love him. I mean, it was just all of it was good. And Reese and Laura and I have continued to work together. Actually, Reese's company, Hello Sunshine, has optioned Tiny Beautiful Things to make for TV, and we are working on that, hoping that will. You never know in film and television what goes through, but we'll see. And what else? Oh, the play. Nia Vardalos and Tommy Kail adapted it. So Nia adapted it, and Tommy directed. Now Tommy was the director of Hamilton, of course, and he's just an amazing guy. And we had, that was a blast too. I was involved with that too. And the coolest thing for me has been to see the way that book, you know, it's a book of letters from people and from me, and you wouldn't necessarily think that could translate to the stage. It's not, it doesn't have like one story arc, you know, the way most plays do. And what's been cool is, so it was a big hit in New York, but now all these different theater companies around the US and have produced it on their stages. And that was a beautiful thing. All last year, I saw several productions, including here in my town of Portland, Oregon. Portland Center Stage made it. And it's just, everyone brings their own story to those words. You know, it was me writing a letter to one person who wrote to me. And the experience of the book was, of course, that like so many people saw themselves in it. And then the story of the play is even, it's even kind of more interesting because you're in the room with people who are recognizing themselves in those characters on the stage. So it's pretty amazing. And I want to say what was so hard. I mean, many hard things about that pandemic, but all those plays that were to be, you know, produced, all those productions of Tiny Beautiful Things that were to be produced had to be canceled or postponed. So that was kind of a heartbreak. I was going to go to DC and see it at the Kennedy Center, and I was so excited. I mean, you know, it's just been sad. I'm so worried about our, you know, small and regional theaters, and we'll see how they survive this. But I hope that they come back when we all can come back.
Yes, and I know you're giving them so much support and giving bookstore support and giving activism support, and I didn't think about that with the plays. I hope they've been postponed and not canceled.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my gosh, the theater, the performing arts have been so hard hit by, you know, music venues and theaters. I just feel so much for all of those people who have been impacted by that. Yeah.
Oh God, I had like 8,000 more questions as usual. Shoot, I was gonna ask for like one surprising Reese or Laura anecdote, and I want to encourage the audience while you're thinking about that to follow Cheryl on Instagram, because she leads like the writer red carpet life. Like, I knew actually before I asked that question that you were still in touch with both of them, and that you all have this wonderful collaboration between very powerful and affectionate women. The affection among the three of you is really palpable. When you first met them, I would have had the awe factor. I would have had like the, you know, the girl from Kansas going to Oz being like, and Oprah's house could, like, I can't touch the hand towels in the bathroom. Like, did you feel that way when you were working with these three ladies?
You know, I just sometimes, well, especially Oprah, who is like so, I mean, obviously so famous, that she's like next level. I knew how famous Oprah was when she came. Yeah, I invited her to the Wild premiere of the film at the Telluride Film Festival, and it was so sweet. I mean, she like flew in just to like see Wild, you know. And when I told Laura and Reese, you know, I invited Oprah and she was coming, even Laura and Reese were like, "Oh my God, Oprah's coming!" And I was like, "You guys are freaking out that Oprah's coming? Like that's, you know, even she's even famous with the famous people, like, you know." But so I will say though, I don't tend to be starstruck. And I think it's the writer in me. You know, the writer in me just knows that everyone is human, and the only thing that fame is that you know, that we're aware of, you know, when somebody is famous, it's just that a lot of people know who they are. It doesn't change who they are. It doesn't change that they're like everyone else in terms of their anxieties and fears and victories and all of that stuff. Right. And so I just always remember that. But sometimes when I'm sitting with Oprah, I'll be like, okay, like this is Oprah fucking Winfrey. You know what I mean? I mean, there's funny things like that, you know, where I'll just be like, have a kind of double take moment. But
and I hope you say that to her at those moments and be like, you know what, you are Oprah fucking Winfrey. That is amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah, but Oprah, I mean, that's what makes Oprah. So many people love Oprah because I do think that she's always showing her vulnerability too. Like she isn't just a star. She isn't just a famous, powerful woman. She's a human first. And so she's real.
Yeah, she leads with her vulnerabilities. She leads with her humanity, I think.
Yeah.
I'm getting pings that I have to let you go.
I know. I want to say the people. Can I tell people about my calendar?
You can do anything you want, Cheryl. Do the thing.
So the lovely people at Workman Press got in touch with me, Workman Publishing, and they wanted to make a calendar of Cheryl Strayed quotes. Like none of them have curse words in them, which is like really, really a big accomplishment. But they're so here it is. It just came out a few weeks ago. I haven't even like posted about it on my social media because I feel like people don't buy calendars for 2021 in July, but soon you'll hear about this. But so you guys get the first peek at my calendar. It's on sale now. It's called Wild, Brave, and True, a year of goodness, bigness, and forgiveness. And it every month has quotes that you can actually have on your wall without offending anyone. Not that anyone's coming over to your house, but you can get that Wild, Brave, and True from Workman Publishing. That is my thing. That's my new thing.
We are all
calendar
for 2021 because 2020 has turned out to be the year that we would like to hurry off the stage as quickly as possible.
Oh yeah, we are looking for 2021. Jenna, email me your address and I'll mail you one. Okay.
What? I will. Can I add the F-bomb to all of the quotes in the
yeah.
Put, little carrots in there.
Indeed.
I would be honored. Thank you. Last question is, well, actually I have two last questions for you, which is breaking every rule of interviewing. But one of the things that I'm going to sort of spool back to the beginning of the conversation. And one of the things that I loved so much about Torch and Wild and the essays and was thinking about like young Cheryl in Minnesota, like where I am now, except northern Minnesota, and this sort of like not recognizing the water that you swam in as being like difficult, like this is a tough life, like when I listened to Wild again, it wasn't just about your mom for me, it was also about like these are some tough conditions to grow up in. And now you're like Laura and Reese and Oprah, do you have ever a message for your younger self, or do you look back at that younger person and think, oh my gosh, honey, your life has turned out like X way, let me tell you, like what would you tell that young Minnesotan Cheryl?
Well, that is, that's when I'm going to like cry about everything that's happened, it's because I'm thinking about that, because the young Cheryl just simply could not even have imagined what the old Cheryl, the now Cheryl, the middle-aged Cheryl.
That's not what I meant.
would be what my life would be like. I grew up in poverty. I grew up really, in, like you said, in difficult circumstances that I knew were difficult, but later I knew, like I could see myself more clearly. And that is when I get a little emotional, when I think like, okay, I have traveled a really far distance, and so many people helped me along the way. So many privileges, white privilege, other privileges helped me along the way. But I also worked really, really hard. And to have made that journey by, propelling myself forward on the power of words, by believing in myself and saying, I'm going to write, I'm going to write, I'm going to write. I don't care how many people say, why don't you get a real job? Keeping faith with what I knew was the truest part of me is how I got here. And that makes me, I just am full of gratitude. And I think it's okay that way back then, young Cheryl couldn't have seen where I was going. I mean, it was beyond, this is beyond my capacity to imagine back then. And yet I think that that's maybe the best way to dream isn't like, where are we going to be in 20 years or 30 years or 40, but where are we going to be today? Where are we going to be tomorrow? What am I going to do today or tomorrow to make my dream come true? And I think that that's what I did that's what I'm still doing.
For young Cheryl, thank you. I feel very fondly toward that very tender young girl, and toward you.
Thank
And
you.
the journey from young Cheryl to now Cheryl has inspired literally millions of people, and we're grateful you made that journey too. So thank you for spending like 18 hours with us today and being so kind about putting up with all of my questions and answering reader questions. I know we've had many more for you, but I have to let you go do some protesting and, Portlandy things.
Jenna, you're awesome. I'm your fan. The next time I see you on an elevator, I'm going to be the one accosting you. Congratulations on finishing your memoir. I had so much fun chatting with you.
Oh, it was a sheer delight, honor, and privilege. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you.
And thank you for everyone who's, I don't even know, is anyone listening to this or watching this? I hope there are a few people out there. I don't see you. I just see Jenna. So all of you, thank you for watching and listening. I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mighty Blaze. Thank you, Mighty Blaze viewers. Bye.
Bye. Bye, Mighty Blaze viewers. Take